I had to tell you one more thing, if I may, unless you had another
No,
question.
go ahead.
But this language is really the motivation. I started about maybe about a year ago. I found a linguist with Wycliffe. Uh, I said, "Hey, Babel is basically a linguistic event. It will have genetic consequences, but the cause is God confusing the languages." And really, it was trying to. So I said, "Can we synthesize linguistics and genetics to create a comprehensive map of humanity?" And really, what arose out of this was the third explanation we already discussed, conquest and migration. And so here I have just printed off from the internet some of the language families to which Bodhi was referring. The Afro-Asiatic, when I saw this is what it really began to click for me. You've got a map here. Unfortunately, the colors are a little bit changed, but in blue here is Afro-Asiatic, and it extends to the Middle East, of course. I said, that looks like the Islamic Empire. You've got another language family up here. The colors are a little bit split, gray and green here, but Genghis Khan's empire. I'm like, wait a minute. Uh, this this is events I learned in high school that seem to be reflected in this map of humanity that this is what the secularists are putting out. And again, the same thing holds true here in genetics. There's a little difference, of course, we learned. Take the African Americans as an example. You can change your language. You come from Africa and you learn English, but you can't change your genetics. The African Americans are still on the African branch of the family tree because that's where they came from. So in both cases we're seeing now, and this is an active research project, linguistics, genetics, these look like they're records of post-Babel extra-biblical history that the secularists, of course, cannot dispute. So this is, I think, going to be is becoming and will become a real challenge for that millions of years time scale when, in fact, everything we've seen the last few thousand years is sufficient, and it leaves an echo, a signature, a stamp in these two fields that no one can dispute.
And you're also working with scientists, creation scientists, who are dealing with the issue of supposed similarities between humans and chimpanzees, that they're so close and so on. Just summarize what they found there.
Yes, and what's interesting is even if you say, forget all the research we've done, and Jeff Tompkins has done some fantastic research, but of course, well, it's a creationist, who cares? I'll say, fine, I'll let you have that, because if you read your own literature, you will find a problem. So if you read the human, our billions of DNA letters were sequenced 2001, chimpanzee followed 2005, and those two papers are the big point of contention. In that paper, and let me just pull it up right here because I have it. I can Google it real fast. Pull my computer up, just so people can see it in the paper itself. They'll talk about 1% difference. That's often the number that's thrown around. There's a 1% difference. We're 98 to 99% genetically identical to chimpanzee. Yeah. So you hear that number, and emotionally that sounds like, well, we're just kissing cousins. How can that be possible? So let me password protected.
So what are some of the other questions coming up, Maria?
So what are the mechanisms for mitochondrial DNA mutations, and what makes an assumption of constant rates valid?
That's a great question. And so there's two parts of the question. The second part was the constant rate assumption. What was the first part again?
What are the mechanisms for mitochondrial DNA mutations?
Okay, and the mechanism of mutation, I would say, is a black box in general for whether it's mitochondrial or some other genetic compartment. It appears to be perhaps environmentally affected. Otherwise, it just seems to be the molecular machines that are doing the copying, reading the DNA, making another copy for the next generation, occasionally make mistakes. We have an error repair system, which is remarkable. There are actual machines that go in and spot mistakes, repair them, fix them. But you've got 3 billion letters, for example, in our total DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is about 16, 17,000. And it's also the site of heavy chemical activity. And so that's in particular for mitochondrial DNA because there's so much chemical reactions going on there, reactive oxygen species and so forth. These are some of the ideas, the chemical explanations for why mistakes happen in the first place. But yes, theologically, of course, it goes back to sin.
And things don't operate perfectly anymore.
Exactly.
Things run down.
Exactly.
And so that's why we age and die, actually. The whole reason for death is because of sin. So you were going to show us there.
Here, Bodhi, I have a question for you. From your research, do you know where the Aboriginals came from.
Yeah, the Australian Aborigines. That's a great question. I'm glad somebody brought that one up. When I did the book, I actually did comment on the Aborigines. A lot of the Aborigines, they actually share the same language family, so we can kind of tie the group together. It's not like there was a whole bunch of different groups of Aborigines that made it down there. There had actually been some genetic research done that actually tied them into some of the Hindu Kush, as well as some of the people in Malaysia, the tribe of Seba, as well as some of the people in the lower parts of Africa. Now, what's interesting is all those other people groups are descendants specifically of Kush, one of Noah's grandsons. The Hindu Kush, for example, you still see a reflection of the name. Seba, the tribe of Seba, specifically in Malaysia, is actually one of the sons of Kush. So, I mean, we kind of see some genetic connections in there as well. So that's kind of a fascinating one as well.
I think I read years ago too that the Australian dingo was very similar to, I think, the Indian wolf or something like that, a dog that they recognised that came down from the north. So that would all fit with that too. Yeah. But Dr. Jeanson, you're going to show us this article. So this is a secular article, right?
This is the paper people point to when they say humans and chimpanzees are kissing cousins, essentially.
Okay.
2005, Nature, one of the big three journals in the globe. So this is the chimpanzee genome sequencing paper. I'm going to zoom down now to the section of the paper where they actually talk about where this 1% number comes from. So here on the section called Genome Evolution, nucleotide divergence, so difference basically. They aligned, so best reciprocal nucleotide level alignments of chimpanzee and human. They're aligning human and chimpanzee DNA. 2.4 billion gigabases, that's 2.4 billion letters of DNA, including the sex chromosomes, and here's where they say it. We calculate the genome-wide nucleotide divergence to be 1.23%. So, settled, isn't it? Well, what does this 2.4 gigabases, 2.4 billion represent? You just scroll up a little bit here. The assembly statistics, the total amount of DNA that they had from chimpanzee was 2.7. 2.7, 2.4, who cares? Well, 2.4 divided by 2.7 is 89% of the total sequence. So this 1.23%, see if I can get them both on the same screen, 1.23% difference comes from 2.4, which is only 89% of the total. In other words, we're 1.23% different in 89% of our sequence, and 11% is unaccounted for or unalignable. Why is that significant? Well, you have another website here. This is just an independent organization. They've done alignments of human and chimpanzee with a different algorithm, and they say, you scroll down here, genome coverage, how much of the chimpanzee genome is found in human? 89%. So two independent sources giving the same number. So my colleague Jeff Tompkins has done his own independent alignment of these, same number, 89%. 1% different, 11% difference. It still seems close. Well, let's put this now in terms of absolute number of letters. How many letters different is an 11% difference? It's about 300 to 400 million differences.
That's
so
massive.
this is a gigantic genetic gap between us and the chimpanzee. Furthermore, the evolutionists, this is a 2014 paper in Science, they've measured the rate at which chimpanzee mutates. We already knew there's been a whole bunch of studies on the rate at which humans mutate. Now we know chimpanzees. And it's not what they predicted. So for years, textbooks have been saying humans and chimpanzees split from the fossil record 4 to 6 million years ago. Well, based on the number of genetic differences, even if they say, well, let's just look at 1%. We know the rate at which humans mutate, which chimpanzees mutate. So the difference, 1% difference, human mutation, chimpanzee mutation, this now says they must have split 13 million years ago. So which is it? This is 100% off from what they said originally. So they're not making accurate predictions in genetics from their evolutionary ancestry model. So this model to me is not very successful, and the 1% difference is definitely not accurate. There's hundreds of millions of differences between us and chimpanzees.
And yet school kids are being taught that as fact, and many people out there have this erroneous view, how can the Bible be true? We're 1% different from chimps, which is not true.
Exactly. And in this book, we have probably half of that chapter, if I remember correctly, deals with all the issues that surround that question. We explain what I've just derived there. We talk about something like human chromosome 2 fusion. There's all these other shared mistakes. There's all sorts of other evidences they like to invoke as evidence of common ancestry as inexplicable apart from common ancestry.
It just shows you the general public out there, students in schools and colleges, are just brainwashed. And they're not taught how to think critically about these things.
And I would say, again, we're seeing tables turn, like with what I said earlier about mitochondrial DNA, that old creationists don't make testable predictions. Actually, now I'm challenging my evolutionists to make testable predictions, and I'm saying, and if you're really confident in your ability to do it, let's go into the lab and do it and see who's right. Here you have a case, let's say with human chromosome 2 fusion, where they've made a prediction and it turns out to be the opposite. They've made a prediction here and it's wrong. What I was going to get at is the other thing we're often accused of is confirmation bias. Basically, cherry picking data. We start with a predetermined conclusion and then we just select those facts that fit what we've decided already is true and just discard everything else, explain away everything else. What are they going to do in this case? They've established 6 million years ago, here's this fact that doesn't fit it. You just revise it. There's a confirmation bias here.
They're
that's
the
going on
ones
as
that
well.
are cherry picking. They're the ones that are really imposing their view on the evidence, and when it disagrees, they ignore the evidence, right?
I don't think they do it deliberately necessarily. I don't think they even realize the extent to which they're ignoring competing explanations. That's really, to me, what this debate comes down to.
Because they're so convinced of the millions of years.
And, or I put it this way, I've had reporters ask me, they'll give me two options. They'll say, well, you're obviously disagreeing with 97% of professional scientists, which is what surveys show. 97% reject creation, accept evolution of some sort, whether God directed or not. So what is it? Is the science, should we throw all that science in the trash, or is there a grand conspiracy? I say neither of those. It's a really simple, boring explanation. Creation is forbidden in the public school system. Professional scientists get their education in the public school system. They go through all their education never having read a single creationist paper. Science is a method of inductive reasoning. Basically, it's you never prove anything, you just disprove the competition. To disprove something, you have to be aware that it exists. So, if you go through your entire education, you're taught there's this hypothesis and varieties of it, and you're not even aware that there's this whole other realm that's making testable predictions, that's confirming explanations in genetics and mitochondrial DNA and nuclear and all these other areas. Well, of course you're never going to realize that you have this confirmation bias while you're doing it. You've never been taught otherwise. So what I tell reporters is it's really simple. They're not aware of the competition. They're forbidden from reading the competition. So of course all they land on is evolution.
They're really indoctrinated.
Yeah.
And they only think in one particular way.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Maria? Yeah.
Yeah, someone said, is it true that you can get all the different skin tones, the different races from Noah's daughters-in-laws?
Yeah. Is it true we can get all the different skin tones, the so-called races? Of course, they're not races. We're all one race biologically, from those 3 women going back there. And the answer is yes. It's just genetic variability, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think what many people don't realize and what really clicks is we've talked about mitochondrial DNA. This is really sort of the exception to the rule. It comes only through mom. Most of our DNA, so I said that's about 16, 17,000 letters, which compared to 3 billion is a tiny fraction. So where does this billion come from? Actually, it's 6 billion. 3 billion from mom, 3 billion from dad. So most of our features are determined from 2 sources. And so we can explain races really just using genetics 101. It goes back to Gregor Mendel in the late 1800s. He used pea plants. You have yellow-seeded pea plants, green-seeded pea plants. You cross them, all the offspring are yellow. So what happened to green? Was it destroyed? No, it's just hidden because yellow is dominant over green. You intercross these offspring, the next generation you have green and yellow in predictable mathematical varieties. So the same thing really holds true with skin tone. You can, even if you broke it down into just 2 genetic varieties, you have 2 parents giving inputs. At the flood you have 3 different couples giving inputs. So you have all sorts of variety, and we know that skin tone is controlled by more than just one particular DNA letter. There's a whole bunch of ones. So you have all these different combinations. 3 sets of parents all giving different inputs, and you can see it today. When a dark-skinned African marries a light-skinned Northern European, their children are middle brownish. They have blended features, and if those children would marry children of other sort of mixed ethnic group marriages, you'd see a whole spectrum. So it's very easy with simple genetics.
And it's basically one skin tone anyway.
Yeah.
Melanin is the main pigment, and it's basically a brown pigment. There's no truly, really black people, no truly white people. It's a matter of what shade you are, not what color you are. So yeah, see, I'm not white. If I was white, I'd look like that, and people would call 911 thinking I had a problem.
Exactly.
So it just comes down to the amount of variability, and that's where people also are easily led astray in regard to speciation, aren't they? Because you can see different species, and they think, "Wow, that's evolution." Wait a minute, that's just a tiny reflection of the variability that's already there in the dog genes or cat genes and that sort of thing. Correct?
Yeah, and classically, we think of species as inability to interbreed. So horses and donkeys are labeled separate species because even though they can produce an offspring, which we have in our petting zoo over there, the zoo here at the Creation Museum, that offspring is sterile. So we'd say there's a reproductive barrier. Well, in humans, there's no reproductive barriers whatsoever. If brother and sister marry, they might not be able to reproduce, but an African can marry a Chinese can marry a Native American, any ethnic group can marry any other ethnic group and have children. So there's the human race is one species. There's no biological basis for saying there should be separate species or somehow there's these weird distinctions. No, these are just varieties that God, now we know from genetics, probably had in the start in Adam and Eve. Again, there's two parents both giving input, and you've got billions of letters. I mean, the mathematical possibilities are incredible.
Yeah, I read one paper where it talked about the number of atoms in the universe is 10 to the 80th power, 1 followed by 80 zeros. But the number of combinations one man and one woman could have just from their genetic variability is like 10 to the 2017th power.
Yeah.
Which is, you can't even think about it, that number's so big. And there's that sort of variability in the dog kind, the cat kind, the elephant kind, and the evolutionists see the result of that variability. And so it's evolution. It's got nothing to do with evolution.
Yes, and so now that we have human sequences from thousands of people around the globe, on average, we're about 0.1% different from one another. So in our billions of letters, about 4 to 5 million, I think I have the number up here somewhere, maybe not on the wall, but about 4 to 5 billion letters, 4 to 5 million letters, so it's a tiny fraction of the billions, 4 to 5 million between me and an African, me and a Chinese, me and a Native American. In Adam and Eve, there were maybe 5 to 10 million, and again, so if there's two different versions of these 5 million, 10 million letters, two different versions of position 1, two different versions of position 500,000, 200 different versions of position 4,500,652. There's massive variety you can have, and it looks like now in the animal kinds, God probably put even more variety. And I can say this because we now have the tiger DNA sequence, we have the house cat DNA sequence, and there's 40 to 50 million differences between them.
And that would explain why you can get these different species in animals. You don't see it in humans because God put in there a greater variability.
Yes, it appears that there were more varieties in animals and plants, in non-humans basically, at the start, whereas humans had less. That's still, millions of differences is a huge number, and you can get a huge number of combinations from that. You can get even more from the animals that were there, which is why you can get 135 bovid species. You can get 37 or so cat species. You can get all this variety you can get hundreds of breeds. That's really what's remarkable. It's something Darwin pointed out too. There's more breeds than species.
And then that's why we have all this information for people in exhibits at the Ark to show that Noah only needed the kinds on the Ark, not the species, not all these breeds and so on, and was far fewer animals than what people realize. So genetics is fun for creationists, isn't it?
Yes, and one of my favorite examples is, let's say, the horse kind or the equid kind. Today you've got 7 living species. You've got 3 different species of zebras, which are distinguishable by their stripe patterns. You've got an African wild ass that got stripes on its legs, which looks remarkably similar to that hybrid that we have out in the zoo at the Creation Museum between a donkey and a zebra. And then you've got 2 wild Asian ash species and a used to be wild horse species. So 7 species. The number of breeds, this is what I like to ask audiences when I'm speaking. How many breeds of horses and donkeys do you think there are? And they'll guess. Well, 50, 100. Over 850 breeds of horses, from Clydesdales to ponies. There's massive variety. And here's what's really the kicker for the evolutionists. We think about the origin of species, the question that's been the basis for this debate for 150 years. Darwin made an argument against the fixity of species using these sorts of data, saying, well, there's all these variety in breeds. Well, why are you saying that species are fixed? We can make we can make more variety in breeds than species. Well, now let's flip the argument around. When did these breeds originate? Forget even the creationist timescale. The evolutionists themselves say hundreds, thousands of breeds. There's thousands of cattle, sheep, and goat breeds, over 3,000. They say all of these arose within 12,000 years or less. So I'm just using their time scale for sake of argument. Then they turn around and say, there's 850 or more breeds of horses and donkeys in 12,000 years. Clydesdales to ponies. Then they turn around and say, but those 7 species, those took 4 million years or so. That can't possibly be true. If you can get this, hundreds of varieties in a few thousand years, well then surely these 7, couldn't have taken that long.
That's a really good point. Hey, Maria, any other questions? I know people could ask questions. Oh, this is fascinating. We could sit here all day. But Dr. Jeanson has to get back to work, and I'm actually going down the Ark, and I'm going to do a live broadcast from the Ark this afternoon at around 3 o'clock. But Maria, any other questions?
Someone asked, how is the data being validated?
How is the data being validated?
So the gold standard of science, I'll use a page from the Evolutionary Playbook. What's the gold standard of science? What's the difference between science and non-science? It's the ability to make testable predictions. You have a theory of gravity, you have a theory of physics. Well, let's test it to see if the space shuttle blows up. Now that's an extreme view. Normally you vet those data beforehand to make sure it's actually going to work and it's going to send a man to outer space and a man to the moon, that sort of thing. That's the gold standard of science, and that's why evolutionists have tried to use that as a club against creationists for decades. Well, how does that advance our understanding of the world? Well, we've just seen. I can predict for you. And let me back up. We've talked about mitochondrial DNA. It's a piece of DNA that helps us metabolize food. Well, thousands, millions of species around the globe metabolize food. They have to take energy from their environment and transform it. They all have mitochondrial DNA. Well, we know the mutation rates from only a handful, less than 10, maybe less than around 5. And I'm saying I can predict, for anyone who's interested, and I'm willing to test this in the lab, I can predict the mutation rate in dogs. I can predict the mutation rate in wolves. I can predict the rate of mitochondrial mutation rate in cats. And any other species on this planet, butterflies. Can the evolutionists do the same? That's the ultimate validation. I think that's the real challenge. So to put it in colloquial terms, they've said, well, you just say God did it. Here's what I think the evolutionists are going to come back to. Well, you're not considering natural selection. I'm going to say, oh, so you're saying natural selection did it. What does natural selection do to help us understand the world? What testable predictions does it make? That's really my challenge to the evolutionist. I think the tables have been completely turned. We have a set of retrodictions. That's what I'm going to call them. We've got the data now, and we can make sense of the past. Well, I can make sense of the future now too. Can evolutionists meet their own standard they've set for us? And not just on some tangential question, on the most important question from their perspective in the biological world, the rate at which mutations happen, the central mechanism of evolution. That's the way to validate it. That's something I'm actively trying to collaborate with some people now on, in going out and doing this now and measuring the mutation rate in mice or in some domestic animal. I think we can do this, and this is a way to validate everything I've just discussed.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
I know there's people asking questions, and we could be here all day, so we'll have to close soon, but let's see what else we got here.
Someone asked, has the Genome Project helped with any of this research?
The Human Genome Project.
Yes, this has been a massive help because let's put it in big picture terms. I'm going to back it up to the origin of species and then bring it back to humans, an example of one of the species. What are species? They're defined by their traits. Zebras by their stripes, their particular pattern of stripes, elephant by its trunk, giraffe by its long neck. Well, those traits are consistent from generation to generation. Put it this way, if a giraffe could birth an elephant birthed something else, we wouldn't even have a concept of species. The fact that species exists is a testament to the fact that it's a fundamentally genetic entity. The only direct scientific record of ancestry is genetics. Well, what's the history of genetics? Gregor Mendel, the start of most genetics textbooks, published his work 1865, 1866, 6 years after Darwin published his first work. We didn't know that DNA was the substance of heredity until 1953, nearly 100 years after Darwin. We didn't have the sequence of our own species in 2001. Basically, we've been arguing about side data, indirect data, for 150 years. Darwin took a massive risk when he tried to answer a fundamentally genetic question 150 years before he had any direct data with which to answer it. So, what has the human genome done for us? Well, this is finally now the first direct scientific record of our ancestry. And when we look at mitochondrial DNA, it fits the young Earth timescale. It fits the structure of the human population genetics at the flood. We look at our billions of letters, and we now have sequences from a couple thousand people around the globe in those billions of letters. It fits God creating differences in Adam and Eve. Well, isn't that arbitrary? No, it makes testable predictions, and I've published these, about the rate at which other things should change, and it fits exactly what we see. We didn't even have time to discuss this. So the Human Genome Project has been a huge help, a huge aid, a huge confirmation of what the biblical record says, and the success we've had in the human realm, the best studied species at the genetic level, has then allowed me to then extrapolate to other species and answer the bigger origin of species question that Darwin did and say, here's really the answer. And I'm working on a book that should be out this fall, running titles after Darwin, three quiet developments that rewrite the origin of every species, to discuss some of this. So it's really the success in humans that's laid the foundation for going to other species and saying we've completely turned the tables, and this is really now the superior model. It's making sense. It's making testable prediction. It's the evolutionists now are going to have to play defense. We're going on offense and taking the argument to them rather than the other way around.
And you know, when you